Awesome. Woo! Who's having an amazing evolve? You? There we go. There we go. Okay. And Jeremy. Okay, that's good.
Two hands.
That's good. I see a few of you from iBeaconstock. You like me so much, you came again. I appreciate that. And as an Android developer and cross-platform developer, for the last 3 years, especially on the Android platform, which I love, it's my favorite platform, I found it really difficult to sort of craft beautiful user interface experiences. And the key problem with this is that there was really never a design specification. Right? And when I look at Windows Phone with their Metro or Modern UI, there's amazing documentation of even icon use and how to design an application from start to finish. iOS, with their different paradigms, skeuomorphism, as you will, to what they are now with this nice flat design, really great documentation. But as an app developer on Android, not only is it a little bit tricky to do some quirks with fragments and layouts and things like that, and everything's XML-based, really, but it's really powerful. I could never really craft the most beautiful user interface because I don't have a designer. I'm not a designer. I think I have an eye for design. Sure, I can click on every single Google app and see what they look like, right? They've spent millions of dollars on research study, but there's even issues there.
Yeah, because, so in fairness, I mean, to be entirely fair, Google has been working a little bit to produce those design guidelines, especially after 4.0, so Ice Cream Sandwich kind of came out. But the issue was that even though the Android team itself, which has a design team dedicated to them, was producing those guidelines, what we were seeing is that Google itself, among all the teams, because they have so many teams that produce mobile apps, what we were seeing is that even at Google, their own team were not even following their own guidelines. So there was something that was seen in the guideline, and then to prove that wrong, there was like 3 Google apps on the side that was doing something entirely different. So this was very, very confusing for users and developers like us.
How many of you are Android users in the room? All right. So how frustrating is it that the refresh or pull to swipe is different in every single application? It doesn't make any sense, right? Even at Google, between Gmail and other applications, it's all different. And that's actually a standard control now in support v4, so it doesn't make any sense.
And even the support, even what became the official control for that, for instance, one of the aspects of the guideline is that the content should never scroll when you do an action like that. But when Google came and released the official component way to do this, guess what? They made it scroll, totally contrary to what the guidelines say, to the point that even someone, Brett Duncavage, who did a talk yesterday, who is a developer at Audio, had to redo his own version to actually follow the guidelines because Google wasn't.
And then now the problem that you have is that as app developers ourselves, we want it to be pixel perfect. So I think you've even implemented that at one point. We blogged about it. So now we have all these libraries doing the same thing in 18 different ways. And I think with Android L Developer Preview this fall, it's a fundamental shift how we'll be designing and creating applications on the Android platform. Now, activities, fragments, those are all going to remain the same. We have some wonderful new UI widgets. But really, we're here to talk about material design.
Yeah, and this is the feeling that we got. So both James and I went to Google I/O this year, and this is exactly the feeling that we got, is that finally Google coming together, all the design teams coming together, and working together to make something consistent, coherent, that everybody would use.
I didn't see this, so I skipped forward. I don't know where that came from.
Oh, yeah, I was so impressed yesterday by the Mexican flair that Siri added to the keynote that I thought I would have some French flair.
Oh, I appreciate that.
To James.
Yeah, my Italian flair is not enough. I see, OK. Well, I think overall, if you ask Andy, the chief Android mascot, what Android L and the material design means, really developers that adopt material design now, getting ahead of their competition, there'll be leaps and bounds of everyone when Android L releases this fall.
And I really want to stress out the fact that this is uncommon. This is the first time ever in the history of Android that Google has went forward and actually released a preview. So if you're familiar with iOS development, Apple has always done something, has always released a preview, what they called gold masters and betas and GMs across the development cycle of their new OS, so that developers specifically could install those bits and make sure their application were working and looking great across all the variation that Apple was introducing. But for Google, the development model has always been, although they are open source, the development model has always been that once they're ready, they just dump it all, and everybody try to figure it out. So this is the first time in Android history of Android L, which is going to become Android 5.0, that we have a preview that we can actually base ourselves on and upgrade our apps to look and feel native in what's going to become Android 5.
And you can already see that what Google themselves are doing is they're implementing this material design in their current applications that are launching even updates for. So they're implementing it backwards compatibility as well. But what's important for us as developers is that we need to be ready on day one. Right? We have to have our apps ready to roll out so our users have a great experience. And we're going to show you everything from the concept of what material design means, from a high-level concept to how we actually get it into our application. And material design is 3 distinct points. When we talk about material design, it's the bold graphic colors that make things pop and the theming of our applications. Really, in the middle here, we have the metaphor. And we're going to talk all about paper and papercraft itself, stacking and shadows, and taking our applications not just limited to an X and Y, but into the Z directions, which is something unique for the very first time that we can do as developers. And we'll also touch on how animation is drastically changing in Android L to really make our applications come to life. Now, we're going to be covering the first 2 parts. This is a double session. So in part 1, we're going to cover all about the theming and the bold intentional graphics and colors and how to implement those, and the paper itself. In the second part, which will be in here right after this, go figure, we're going to cover all animation because it's such a large topic and how you can get running on that today. So first, let's just take a look at Android L. If you've never seen Android L in material design, we just want to jump and show you what that looks like.
So this is an emulator. So right now, Android L, you can install it on Nexus 5 and Nexus 7 second generation. Google has also made available a couple of emulator images. So here we are using one of those emulator images. And let me tell you, I was so used now to Xamarin.Android player that going back to this is not good.
It's at least an x86, so it's not quite as good.
Not quite good. But stay tuned, guys. I'm sure we're going to have L developer previews images soon for Xamarin.Android player too.
And one thing you'll notice is the home screen isn't dramatically different.
No, it's not dramatically different. They
Same.
change wallpapers in a couple of the other images, but mainly it's the same thing. The notification areas is one of the areas where they are really worked on. So again, using this material aspect of it that we're going to cover. Couple of default application have changed too. I don't know if you want to talk about let's say the phone dialer.
Yeah, the phone dialer is interesting. You can see it's automatically 100% different than what's on your phones today. Now, if you've been running Developer L Preview, then you know Android Developer L Preview, then you're good to go. But just look at the animations and graphics that are happening. As you click a button, you get these little circles that are spiraling off, deleting. We're calling this a floating action bar button, that dialer on the bottom, that's a fab, as we call it, floating action button.
Also,
but even the tabs, look at those animations that come in, even in an emulator that's working fantastic. To see those animations, so we're giving reference to what the user is doing. It's not just flat, it's just not sitting there. They can see that they're touching it, right? And do that one more time. Simple, elegant, brings it actually to life. I think the calculator is a great example of some unique things that we're going to be showing. So it's a calculator. You don't expect much from a calculator, right? It adds and subtracts some numbers. But what's hanging out on the right-hand side? What's all of our complex math functions? But notice how it's almost like a navigation drawer that's bringing this in and out, but there's shadows and drop shadows, but in context that something's happening over there. Right? It's just not hidden over in the foreground. And notice the animations when you need to expand and make that text smaller. It keeps going. But I really like the delete button and long pressing it. That's cool. I don't know, that's something that we should all be able to do, and we're going to show you how to do that. So let's jump back into slides. So we're just going to give everyone a hands-on, that's the look and feel of some of the things that we're going to be showing today. And we talk about material design. The first part is the material theme of our applications. And we've all been used to the hollow design, right? It's beautiful. I love it. It was introduced in Android 3.0, really embraced in Android 4.0, obviously, because no one used 3.0. Let's be honest. I think it breached 0.1% and never reached there and left there.
It's basically one tablet that is shipped for Google I/O and then nobody bought it.
No one bought it. But in Android 4.0, we had Hollow, Hollow Light, and Google has extended that into new themes that we can use, which is Material, Light, and Light Dark Action Bar here. Now, this is doing a lot of things. I'm going to run through a few examples of this later on of what this means to introduce material themes to our applications, because it's more than just specifying a variable and inheriting this and updating it. The idea here is that this is going to drastically change all of our controls and how things look and feel. And when we really talk about material design, we are really talking about bold, intentional graphics and colors, making things pop, making distinct color choices for a reason, so our users are drawn into that area. And we do that with the themes. And the themes have three distinct properties. A primary, which is our primary branding color, which is in the middle there, we can see with My Files. So if you're a company, anything that is your branding guidelines or your main color of your application, that's where that color goes. We have a dark variant of it, so just a few shades later, which we can see in the status bar. And finally, an accent color. And this is for your own choosing. We have a lighter accent of a blue here, but in the bottom right-hand side, we'll see a floating action button that's a bright yellow. And that's the first thing you notice on this page, because it's the action that we want our users to take. And that's really important.
And another aspect that is important too that you should notice is that the status bar also has a specific color. So the idea here with L is that before, in other versions, you were fairly limited to your own square of the screen. Android was applying its own, in that case, system bar, navigation bar at the bottom. But with Android L, the idea is that the entire screen is your property, and you can do whatever you want with it.
Yeah, you own that screen and all of it, including the bottom of it as well with the back and home buttons. And when you think about selecting your UI color palette, Google has already done a fantastic job of picking out colors that they think work well. We'll have a link later on to the Google design specification, but they have an entire palette of hundreds of colors that you can pick and choose from. But pick what's right for you. For instance, we like this primary indigo color for our theming, and also a darker shade, and then we have an accent color of pink. But notice that we also have other shades as fallback colors, because that pink might not work good against all backdrops. So really, when you think about theming, think about a few colors in two distinct palettes. This is my main color and my accent palette. And this is how we get into our application. So we can see all of the different properties on the right-hand side of our screen. And those, like Jeremy was saying, is all of it, including the navigation bar color as well. So we can see that I've inherited from theme material light, and I've specified three brand new attributes: the color primary dark, and the accent color. And that's what my user interface will look like. So colors are one aspect of it. But I think when I am around, half the time I don't use my phone as a phone. Right? It's a glorified camera and text messaging device. Yeah, that's about it. It's a really good email client. And we're all spoiled, I think, with Gmail on phones. When I look at iOS, I'm like, anyways, when I think of the color, when I think of Instagram, and I think of Snapchat, right? These are visual applications. They're adding life to our applications through imagery. And with Android L and material design, it enables us to do a whole plethora of new things, including not just accenting shades, which means that we're able to mix and match not only our accent colors, but theme based off the actual images that we're displaying. A great one here is in the middle with JFK. I'm flying into JFK. Of course, it's foggy and it's misty and it's in San Francisco. But I've drawn out some colors of purple there. Another great example is mixing and matching colors with album artwork. For Hariguna, when we see the bright yellows that have been extracted. And this is exactly what it would look like. We can see here I have an album from the Walker here that's playing from Fitz. And the dark color is highlighted on the bottom. Notice we're taking the entire screen on the top, including the status bar, and covering all of that. But obviously the pink color here is what's standing out of the image of the album. So we want to use that, where it's our play color, our mix color, our prime theme that's going to really pop. That's our primary action here. Now, what Google did is they allowed us to not only theme our application, but they added a new API called Palette. And what Palette does is it allows us to automatically throw at any drawable. Just here's a drawable, here you go. Which means any image that we have, and it will dynamically generate a palette scheme for me to theme my application off of. And vibrant and muted colors as well. And what we do for Xamarin developers is we expose this via a Nouget package, which is up on the nouget.org. On Xamarin.Android support v7 as well, palette library. So you can pull that into your application.
And it's an important aspect, too, is that a lot of the functionality, not a lot of functionality, but some of the functionality that are brought to L, like Palette is a good example, are actually made available as part of the support packages. So for those who don't exactly know what support packages are, it's basically Google take on fragmentation They acknowledged that they had a fragmentation problem with a different Android version, and so they started releasing what they call support package, which are pieces of code that you can integrate into your application, that are part of your application, that replicate features that are part of a greater Android version release. Or in some cases like this one, they don't even include this in the framework. They just ship it as part of the support package. So this means that you can use Palette not only for your future Android L apps, but you can also use it in your previous app that run today on the version of Android of today.
Yep. A great example of that is the action bar compatibility layer, which is backwards compatible as well. So you think about what we've done is we just didn't throw an entire support package. We've kind of broken it up here a little bit so it doesn't bloat the application, which I think is a great aspect of how we develop applications. Take this one functionality, here's exactly how it works, so if that's what you want in your application, you're good to go. So let's see what this looks like in action. So I'm going to pull up Xamarin Studio here. And I have specified here, so I have my properties and resources.
Maybe just a little bit more before. So Android L and Android Wear support is currently only part of the alpha channel because it is also a preview by Google. So if you want to use any of the L feature or if you want to use any of the things we're going to demonstrate today, you should switch to the alpha channel of Xamarin Studio, Visual Studio, Xamarin.Android.
Yeah, just like Android L is a developer preview for us as developers, it's an alpha channel right now because it's not Gold Master yet. So this is going to look hopefully pretty familiar to you, but here I am inside of my styles.xml. So these are all my themes of my application that I have. The unique part that I loved about Android is that you can theme anything under the sun. You can just apply colors, you use subclasses, you have a parent, and it's yours. So our theme that we're using throughout the entire demo, and Jeremie's going to be using a light theme. I'm going to use a dark theme for the main page. But here it is. I've just specified the Evolve Material theme, and I'm inheriting here from theme material. And if you've never done this before, it's really important because this is what's bringing to life the hollow or the material design that we're really focusing on and what tells Android under the hood to start theming and bringing new styles to all of our controls.
And this is very important because if you want the lowest common way to port your application to L, so there is several ways that we're gonna show you, but applying the material theme this way is the first step, and it brings you a long way already. This is going to bring you some of the animation that you have seen in the demo of L we have done are just brought by doing this single change. So this is very important to do.
And then I've also specified a few other themes like material light and the dark theme as well that I'm going to be accenting and show kind of off the different how these look, including one that I've added specific attributes to and ones that I have not. So let's go ahead and pull up the emulator here. I'm going to jump back to the home screen. There we go. This one's mine, I believe. So the first thing you'll notice is that I'm extending all the way up to the status bar right up top. And I've really embraced this color palette here to bring in all these buttons. So this is it's a little bit prettier than a list view with some clicks on it. So when I tap into the dark theme, we're going to notice a few things. This is standard. I haven't done any theming at all. So if you're using standard hollow, this is what your material will look like. And the interesting part is the default still uses this accent of blue. They really like blue. So when I check a checkbox, I get these nice blue colors in and out. Same thing with my radio buttons, and you can see some subtle animations that didn't exist before if I had just supplied an older theme here. I can go ahead and I can toggle this button back and forth, smooth animations, and the same thing here. So the entirety of my theme just for dark is here. I think another interesting attribute is that as we're extending up to the action bar and to the status bar, so is Android and Google. So here we can see that my overflow menu, this isn't a bug, this is what it looks like. So they've extended the overflow menu up to the top here as well. If I go back and into the light theme, we're going to see an entire light theme here as well. And it's just very interesting because it's actually, I don't know if they picked bad colors to begin with or if that was the choice. It's kind of this weird gray. It's not bad. It's not beautiful. But we can see the same styling here that we have on all of our buttons. And as I go back, let's really take a look at that light theme. So I've themed this application a little bit more. So now my colors, my application is in here with a light theme. And notice I have this nice purplish pink color as my accent color. And with one line of code from my theme, it automatically styles all this for me. which is really nice. So I think probably if we want to get into a little bit deeper dive of code and when I talk about imagery, so we have some colors, that's great. And like, James, that's great. You made a theme, awesome. We really want to dive into what you can do with the imagery. So if I dive into palette, I'm a pretty big Bass Nectar fan myself. I have a few albums here in my collection that I can flip through. He gives out a lot of free music, pretty intense concert to go to. But we're going to notice a few things already that are incorporated in material design. We have these nice cards in our grid view with some shadows that are appearing here. And if I was to dive in to, let's say, the immersive music mixtape side 2, which you actually heard some music from earlier here, this is what my application would look like. Doesn't look great.
Nah, not really.
It's not great. So I'm going to apply a palette. Boop. It's pretty cool. So what's happened here is I've asked Google, and I've asked Android, the Android palette, which I shouldn't ask Google. I know Google's not going to reply to me. I've asked Android to go ahead and theme this application. And at the bottom here, I've spit out every single color in the palette that it's given me to select from. And I've selected a few too. But what's nice is if I go over to Noise versus Beauty and apply the palette, it's completely different. And I can see I'm not only just theming the status bar, the action bar, no drop shadow on the action bar, but I'm theming the actual, the title here as well. And there's some really great ones when I apply the palette. This one's cool. Picks up pink. Boom. I really like that. So this allows me to take these images and apply it dynamically, extremely fast, asynchronously. So I'm going to dive into how that actually works under the hood. So I've navigated to my image detail palette activity, if you will. And I've implemented an iPalette async listener. This says, when I've done applying the palette and I've processed your image, I'm going to give you a callback. So this little setup code, it's not too crazy. So I go ahead and I find a few variables or a few controls. I set their name. And then this is the method that I'm calling here. When I click that button, I'm going to go ahead and generate a bitmap just from the bitmap factory asynchronously. So of course, I'm making my async await calls here. And when I'm done, I can say palette.generate async. And this is available to me because I brought in my new J over here. We can see it right there, support v7. So I pass it the bitmap, and I pass it a number. You're like, James, that's interesting. What is that number? Well, I'm glad everyone here asked. Well, that number is how many samples would you like the palette library to create for me? And if you ask for a lot of them, it's going to take longer. If you have a really large bitmap, it's going to take longer. So think about this. And they have default values. If you're using images or avatars, 24 is pretty good. For landscapes or even album art like this, a little bit smaller palette is better. Because obviously those sometimes are a little bit better, high resolution.
So for a little bit of context though, so you have to be careful about how many colors you want to extract from your images. But just to reassure you, the palette is optimized. It's using under the hood what's the accelerated backend they have?
Oh, the hardware accelerator like OpenGL backend?
No, they have shaders, RenderScript.
RenderScript, sorry. Thank you.
So they're using RenderScript internally, which is the way to do OpenCL on Android, to compute that dynamically on GPUs so that they get the information as fast as they can.
Yeah, so when I ask it to generate a palette, sure enough, it returns a palette to me. And when I come in here, I first obviously check against palette is null. But when I have my palette, I can dive in, and it gives me this palette item. And here I can see, just like you'd expect from the slides, we have dark muted, dark vibrant, light muted, and muted colors. So I can pick and choose my application and see what works best. So what I've selected here is, oh, this is an important aspect that I've dived into. See, I'm doing a null check. The important part of palette is since we're generating samples, the palette library can only do its best job to think and detect with RenderScript and all that goodness what images you want. Just because you've generated a palette doesn't mean that all 6 of those palettes exist. So you always have to check against null, and then it will return an RGB value for you to specify. So what we can see here is I set the status bar to the color of light vibrant and the name background of the album artwork. And then I do the same here for the action bar, where I set the background color to a dark vibrant. So I mix light vibrant and dark background vibrant together to make it pop. So that's the idea. Mix your lights and your darks together for if you're doing a dark theme or a light theme to make one of those colors your key accent colors. And that's what's going to generate something like this. Let's see if we have another one. See, va va boom, boom. So this actually generates and brings our images and makes our entire user interface really come to life more than anything. It feels integrated, I would say, than just displaying, where is it goes, right? Than displaying that. It's kind of gross and ugly. And as developers, we're not going to know what album they selected. We can't generate that, so that's what palette is for.
And this is a central theme and idea of the whole material design specification, is that user-generated content should be at the center, front center of your experience. And so that's why palette, by taking dynamically the values from what the user generate, make it feel integrated into the overall experience. So this is very important. This is something I will really stress on. All right, so another important aspect, and this is very exciting actually, because this is the first time that I have seen so much detail in any design specification, literally, about layout and typography. So if we had to find a common theme to the entire specification regarding layout and typography, it would be print design. And by print design, I mean newspaper, magazine. So what essentially all those guys have been doing there for decades already. So if you have opened a magazine, if you opened a newspaper before, I'm sure you all have, there is a very specific set of rules in those kind of things that make about like fonts, about colors, about size, about alignments that are very specific to this field.
And they've been years upon years to really craft this. So that's why when you open a newspaper every single day, you know where to look.
Exactly. It is a common and central. If you open the New York Times, you know it's the New York Times. And so Google has essentially inspired themselves on that to create a set of guidelines specifically tailored for the Android platform. So the central theme is the baseline grade. So if you have done Windows Phone development before, this should look familiar to you. So the idea here is that the screen is divided in small little squares, in our case 4 deep squares, all over the screen. And each element on the screen should align to that baseline grade, every element. On the font side, we still use Roboto. So Roboto is a font that was introduced also in Ice Cream Sandwich. It's the default font if you don't specify one in any Android application. So for L, they've reused the same font, but they have added a couple of different variants that goes with it. So we have light variants, we have bolder variants, et cetera, et cetera. But the core idea of Roboto remained there. So the core idea remained there.
Yeah, use it. It's a beautiful font. Really, more than anything. Embrace it.
And so together with that font and together with the grid, what's important to have is a typographic scale. So again, this is a direct relationship with print design, where a typographic scale is always used. So the idea is that each element on a page, or in our case in an app, needs to have is mapped to a specific level. And that level has its own color, has its own contrast information, has its own kerning, has its own font, size, et cetera, et cetera. So a very comprehensive list. So this is the list of the several, the typographic scale that is used in material design. And it's very easy to use in your application today, because what Google has done is that they have converted, they have synthesized all that information that I just talked about into several themes, several styles that are prefixed by text appearance.material. So if you have ever used already a style like large, small, medium in your text view, now you can use the same kind of style to directly pull in from material design typographic guides.
And I think the best part about the typographic scale here and using these attributes is they're all based on SP. So they're not dipped. They're not based on the density. It's based on the SP scale. It allows you to, if your user is using accessibility features, if they have hard eyesight, this is all going to scale at the correct location and size. And really, it's really about using the correct font at the correct time, such as a display 4, display 1. And a good baseline recommendation is never have more than 3 font sizes on a page. That's exactly. From Google themselves.
And this is still true.
Yeah.
And so all of these can come together, the baseline grade, the typographic scale, to bring key lines. And so the idea here is that every element, by having every element follow the grid and align with each other, the content breathes. And I think this is very clear when you see those screenshots, especially with every element, and that's very important, every element of the UI, all the way from the hamburger button to our fab or floating action button, with our avatar, everything is aligned. Our list items are all aligned with the title of the screen, etc. There's also a very precise dimension for the list item A, for instance, the way things are centered, the way things are pushed away from the screen. And all of this comes together, and you can feel that the content is breathing and it comes to life.
Yeah, things just aren't smushed together, and we're not just throwing things in a linear layout just to throw them there. We're giving the spacing meaning to draw attention. So putting that floating action bar button in the correct spot that aligns with everything else just makes our UI look fresh and clean.
Exactly.
So fresh and so clean.
So let's see a little bit how we can do that. So right now they're not entirely ready on this, and so you still have to do a little bit of hacking to kind of get those key lines kind of in the correct space. So I'm not going to really show you the code because there's probably going to be a better way when it comes out. But I just want to show you an implementation of one of the screenshots that is actually displayed on the design guideline that I have here. This is a list. That could be the list, for instance, of my favorite talks that I have on the Xamarin.Android lab that James actually wrote, that I hope you all have. And so what I want to bring you here is that, let me actually enable touch so that I can actually show you exactly what I mean by the key lines. So if I go to developer options, this is actually very useful if you're doing a demo yourself. Note that in the developer options, you have this checkbox here that allows you to show touch, like here. So if I go back to our application here, so what I want to really stress out is the way every item on the screen, including the system items, are aligned together. So if I go here, you can see that my avatar, my subtitle here, precisely align with each other. There's also a very specific sizing that I use here for my list item. And again, title aligning perfectly with the text content on my list item here. I'm also using some of the typographic scale I've shown you before, here with a slightly bigger font and a slightly denser aspect for each character. So this is my subhead, the subhead style. And here I have a more simpler body style for content that should be just below it.
It looks like there's some other interesting talks happening at Evolve as well, such as my talk tomorrow on effective navigation, and your talk as well on mastering time and space.
Exactly.
So more good Android stuff.
All right, so another central aspect of the second point of our talk is that you may have wondered walking into this room what material design stands for, or why is there this word material in it? Well, the story was that when Google came together, so they came all together, all designers came together, and they started prototyping what would be the next version of Android design-wise. And so as good designers, they would prototype digitally using software, but they would also go to whiteboards and paper. And so while they were doing this, and while they were essentially cutting bits and pieces of paper to assemble the UI, it just came naturally to them that paper is actually a good material for doing your UIs, because each piece of your interface could just be that, a piece of paper that would then slightly line up on each other. And so the metaphor then became that you would give away, you would convey the notion of hierarchy to a user by having those stacks of paper line up to each other, which basically line up to having a Z index, like James said at the beginning. So the idea is exactly that. Each element of your UI becomes a piece of paper that has a precise Z index that make it stack together. And so obviously, since this is a flat screen, you're not going to see that if we just do it like that. Everything would just seem to be concatenated together. So what they're doing to bring this depth back to the user is that they have implemented shadows. And this is not the shadow that you haven't seen before, because we had shadows in Android before, but this was software render shadows, or designers would just add shadows themselves in Photoshop or anything, and then apply that directly to the UI. This is not this. This is a real game-like, like a game engine implemented shadow system with a global illumination inside your whole scene. So the idea is that you set up a specific Z elevation on your views, and then the system dynamically gather all of that in all the views on the screen and compute the perfect, realistic shadows that goes with it.
And this allows it to give you really photo and light realistic. So as this light comes down, the shadows are realistic and you get the hierarchy. So as you stack pieces of paper together, those shadows, based on the z-index, scale down. And they're hardware accelerated. That's the most important part. You no longer need 9 patches all over the place that I've generated 1,000 times to create these drawables or these cards, as you will, to make these elements rise above. Again, drawing attention to the important parts of our application.
And this is also a real-time system, which is very important because that means you can also animate those changes. So we're going to see that later, how this is actually used. And so there is 2 ways. So because of that idea of stacking paper, there's actually 2 modes that you can see. The first one is seams. So in the question before, typically for a list, like it especially come in reason when you use list views. When you have a list view, you have list items that are basically stacked on the same level because they are at the same level for the user perspective. So what they do is that they don't cast a shadow on each other, but instead create what we call a seam, which is essentially a simple line separator.
Yeah, so think of just 2 pieces of paper
lining up together.
Coming together. No shadows are displayed. It's just simply that seam.
Exactly like you see on the scene. This is made to reflect real life. And so the second case, as you can guess, is when a piece of paper is just above another one. And in that case, depending on the elevation, the relative elevation of the 2, it's going to cast a shadow that has a specific length. So if you show it again, you can see that there is a shadow underneath the second paper. And this is depending on how much the paper is close to each other. So let's see exactly how this is implemented. So I have a demo here, which is basically consisting of 2 views, like in the slides. So one of them, so in the initial state, both of my views have an elevation of 0. So since they are the same level, the system is going to compute that this is a seam. So it's going to draw this very soft here line between the 2. And so what I did is that I implemented a click handler, and so when I'm going to click on a view, it's going to raise its elevation by 1 dip. So if I start clicking here, you see that the seam slightly evolve into something a little bit bigger. There's a start of a shadow starting to appear underneath here.
It's just a little bit more than a seam at this point.
Exactly. But as I start clicking more, you can see that a shadow here is slowly growing out of it. And I can go all the way up, and the shadow is just continually going to go.
And notice how it dissipates, too. As it's so long, it really gets spread down the screen. And that shadow, now that we're at 31 dip, is really extending all the way over because it's so far above that other view that light is casted down over it.
Exactly.
It's really intriguing.
And so here are your square views, but if I were to use something that is not a square but like a circle, it would also follow that exact, typically around a rectangle like a card, it would actually also follow that outline and cast the appropriate shadow for it too. And so if I go back here, I can show you again the effect, going back, growing, etc., etc. So this is very simple to implement. They have added a couple of new properties and a couple of new XML attributes to do this. So if I jump into my solution here, in Papercraft activity, so here I set my, I get my views. I have 2 views in a linear layout. So this is very standard view. So this aspect is implemented at the view level. So any view, a button, or anything is going to be able, you're going to be able to set an elevation on it. And so the idea here is that you have a couple of different properties. The main one here that I'm using is translation Z. So the same way you have an X and Y, and corresponding to you have a translation X and translation Y that you use for animation. Google followed their own trend and created a Z property, elevation property, and a translation Z that allow you to animate this change too.
I think this is great because now, even with the Z translation, games have been able to pseudo do this for a long time. But now we can just drive this into our applications to do dynamic lighting and shadows like this with literally 1 line of code.
And I'm actually just going to show you. So this is the property that you can set. So since my view by default, so view by default have an elevation of 0, so I didn't specify it. But if I were to specify it precisely here, or I could maybe set an existing elevation, I would do it like that. You can also do it in XML. I haven't done it myself, but I can show you how to do it. So the same way you have a property you can access in code, you can also do it here in XML itself. And so this is following the same trend. You just put an elevation property like that, following with any dimension you want. So a dip, for instance, like that here. And this is going to do the same thing.
It's actually really just that simple. So when you start laying out, take pieces of paper. This is what I do when I start crafting my user interface, I cut out pieces of paper and see where those elevations should be, including things like the action bar, because we now have access to dynamically implement that and integrate that into my application. So for instance, when you saw the palette example, I said, don't give me any shadow, because I want that to be completely flat and really integrate into the images.
Which would mean it's create a seam, essentially.
Yeah. So great. So that is the end of part one that we wanted to talk about. We introduced a few things, not only just material design as a concept, but how to start adding little pieces of functionality from theming to accent colors, elevation, and obviously the support palette library. And what's intriguing about the support library that we're going to dive deeper into is more UI widgets that we have available to us as Android developers. Because as the name implies, V7, I can actually take that functionality back all the way to Android Froyo, if you want to. But, So with that, we'll open up. We have a little bit of time for any questions and answers. We will repeat the questions as well. Yes?
That was kind of my question. We do have to be backward compatible to do Node update and redesign for this. Is that still going to be available at all?
So in the next session, I'm going to touch completely into backwards compatibility on all fronts, from material design. I have a few slides on this and examples of exactly how to do it. You can imagine that you would just follow the same principles of specifying a version number, such as layout-v21 or styles. But I'm going to really dive in because there's some intricate parts of how the shadow system and some of the UI widgets work when it comes to hardware acceleration. Because as Nat said, there's 19,000 different active Android devices. So you can imagine it's a little tricky for Google to implement that across the board.
And there's also some distribution concern, especially with the Play Store, that we're also going to talk about, which you need to know if you want to start shipping your apps.
Yep.
So the Android L image will be available on the Android Player?
Should be at some point.
Yes. I think we're going to wait.
Yeah.
I think at this stage, likely the rumors, if we follow the rumors, Android L should be released probably at the end of the month, starting of next month. So as soon as they do that and we have the full release source code, we should be able to make, an image for Xamarin.Android. This is definitely,
Hopefully. Yeah, like Miguel said, we'll be releasing more and more images for the Android player as well, so you'd expect that. Sorry, I apologize. Thank you. So the question was the Android player. Right now, there's only a KitKat and a Jelly Bean image. Well, we expect an Android L image as well for the Xamarin.Android player. And the idea is that we'll be releasing more over time, and hopefully that will be when the final GM seed from Android comes out. But I'm not 100% positive, so don't quote me. Yes?
Does the shadow go in all directions? Does that just show it going down?
The question was the shadow in all directions? And correct, it does. So if you have borders around this, we're going to see this in the next session as well. That shadow takes that light and disperses it in all directions. So if you have a circle, it'll disperse that in omnidirection.
You have to imagine the light sources, essentially, you have to imagine a fake, like a virtual light source that is standing a little bit above your screen, and so you're casting the shadow from this kind of angle, basically. And so when you take the typical example of cards, cards in the Google design language have rounded corners. And so the system also takes into account those rounded corners to cast the exact same shadow back onto the surface.
I'll go to in the far back. You, yep. Go ahead. Of overdraw?
Sorry, I didn't hear it.
The question was, is when you're doing shadowings, are we adding a level of overdraw?
No, so this is totally handled by the system for you. So this is computed the same way. So the way it works on Android is that you have a system called display list. So things are drawn into these things that are essentially texture, GPU texture. And so all the shadow system, as I said, is handled by the system at that stage on the GPU. So this is as accelerated as you can get.
And in the orange shirt back there in the far back.
When you're dynamically changing the palette, can you also change the color of the icons and the top, the time, the signal strength, and all that? Some of your color combinations that it picked, you couldn't really read.
So the question was, what about the status bar? Do we have control and access to the colors of the status bar? We saw I was dynamically theming those as well. As far as I know, I do not believe so. I don't think we could say those come in the status bar icons like Wi-Fi and battery.
Oh, no. So this is the only part that you can't change. Yeah. So that's why, so this is going to stay white. And I think the design direction they're actually going is to be even more abstract in the way they display those icons. But also you can count on the fact that those icons are always going to be white, but they're always going to be there.
Yeah. And the same thing would be true for the navigation on the bottom.
Exactly.
Yes. Question here?
Are there any new layout mechanisms for handling the key lines like you were?
So the question was, are there any new mechanisms for key lines?
And so I think that's the problem. That's where it's lacking. That's why I didn't show you anything, because to arrive at the result that I showed you on my test layout, I had to do a couple of things that I probably don't want to say publicly.
But all the code will be open source.
All the code, yeah. I want to reiterate. So
on our
what we're
GitHub.
showing you, all the source code here is going to be probably part of our sample section. So you can find that on samples gallery in the Xamarin website. But yes, to answer your question, yes. So this is an aspect that they have not really worked on, I think, at the moment. But the same way we have help already for, let's say, the typographic scale with specific style, I expect that they're also going to add those kind of helpers to the final release to do exactly that.
Well, so we're out of time now. Part 2 is coming up, all about animations and really deep diving. I think the whole thing's about 5 slides and a lot of code. So I hope you all stick around, and thank you.